Let's come back from the lunch break, please. Hmm. We need to make sure that Mr. Boutier is on the platform before I begin. Mr. Boutier, I saw two listings for you there in the attendee list now. One I unmuted, the other one I made a panelist.
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Christina Sheehan. I believe we're all set now.
So Ms. Sheehan, you're, excuse me, you're coming through as though you're speaking through a megaphone in an auditorium. We may need to work on your audio after I take public comment. But for right now, I'm going to take public comment. We are at the 1 o'clock public comment session in this hearing, EIB 2127. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer appointed by the board to conduct the hearing. Public comment is taken through audio, not video, is limited to 5 minutes, and is taken under oath along with all other testimony in this matter. Let me give you the names of the folks who reached out by email to the board administrator, Pamela Jones. I will call you in this order. David Baldwin, Preston Miles, Anita Amstutz, David Patterson, Patricia Sheeley, and David Anderson. In the event you are on the platform to offer public comment and did not reach out by email, that's fine. Still happy to take your comment. Chat is enabled for everyone. Please just reach out through chat if you'd like to offer comment and have not done so already. So let me start with Mr. Baldwin, if I can find him here. I don't see Mr. Baldwin among the attendees, but I do see two call-in users. I'm going to unmute each of the call-in users in the event one of our commenters has called in. I'm unmuting call-in user number 9. Would you identify yourself, please? Call-in user number 9. Okay. Call-in user number 10, I'm unmuting you. Would you identify yourself, please? No. So these may well be calls that are made in conjunction with computer access, which is fine. So I didn't see Mr. Baldwin. Let me look for Preston Miles. Nope, I don't see Preston Miles. Also, even if someone signed up for a particular slot and have not made it onto the platform for that time period, I remain happy to accept your public comment at any one of the other 24 or so public comment opportunities between now and October 1st. Anita Amstutz, let me see if Ms. Amstutz is with us. I see. All right, Ms. Amstutz, I'm unmuting you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. Your voice is coming through very clearly. If you would please spell your first and last name.
Anita, A-N-I-T-A, Amstutz, A-M-S-T-U-T-Z.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that you are about to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you, honorable members of the board, and Felicia for inviting me here today. I am ordained in the Mennonite Church, and I have been serving communities in New Mexico for almost 20 years. I teach my congregation, we try to teach our people to be good stewards of the earth, of creation, because if we care for the earth will take care of us, since everything we need and are sustained by comes from the good earth. We also teach that for how we take care of one another. When we take care of one another, then we will survive. We will be able to thrive. So I have been following the oil and gas industry, and it's in this particular part of the world, and especially in the southern part of the state. And what I understand is that New Mexico gas operations emit at least 1 million metric tons of climate warming methane a year, and thousands of smog forming volatile organic chemicals. Those are VOCs. And that can include anything from benzene, which is a known cancer causing agent, to things that provoke asthma. I also understand from reading that 130,000 New Mexicans live within a half mile of oil and gas production, a half mile. And this is really concerning for me, knowing the incredible, the ways these are impacting communities. Are not taking care of our earth and the way we can curb these kinds of particulates, and methane in particular, which is a greenhouse gas more powerful, 84% more powerful than carbon dioxide. I ask, is it good for each other? How do we take care of one another in our communities in this state? And finally, I wonder, is it good for business, knowing that so much waste is happening with the flare-offs and the gas leakage? That's not even good in terms of business sense and the bottom line. So I ask you to consider, please, as a faith voice in our communities, from here all the way up to Farmington, I have served communities. Please, please, protect our communities by requiring more frequent inspections for finding and fixing oil and gas leaks in the field. Number two, ensure strong requirements for operators to control pollution before the completion of our oil and gas wells, as they're creating those existing wells. And finally, strengthen requirements to cut pollution on production in the field. I ask you, board members, to please consider how we can be good stewards of not only our creation, our natural resources in this state, and also for our communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amstutz. We will go now to Mr. Patterson. So I know I saw you. There you are. Mr. Patterson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through clearly. Thank you. Would you
Good.
raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. My name is David Patterson. My wife, Leslie, and I live in Las Cruces, where we enjoy our tiny garden full of native plants that attract hummingbirds, native bees, butterflies, and an assortment of other birds that come to our feeders. Leslie has been feeding hummingbirds in the various places she's lived for close to 40 years. She still dreams about their arrival in the spring and mourns their departure in the fall. Both of us were devastated last year when hundreds of thousands of migrating birds started falling from the skies over New Mexico, caused by a combination of factors, but all related to a changing climate. We have read extensively about the causes of climate change and the adverse effect it is already having on our planet, and it is getting worse faster than most of the scientists thought it would. At times, we feel hopeless and helpless. We don't have money or power or political influence. We do, however, still have our voices and the ability to vote. So today, we are collectively using our voice to plead with the Environmental Improvement Board to make the ozone precursor rule stronger than is already proposed. We have read the same reports that you have about the methane cloud over the Four Corners area, the hundreds of thousands of tons of VOCs and methane that is spewed into the air over New Mexico by oil and gas companies that have been fighting regulations for years, leaving thousands of wells abandoned and leaking. We're well aware that these companies contribute close to 40% of our state budget, and they use that money as a cudgel or a bribe to keep lawmakers from enacting meaningful regulations. We are also very aware that the oil and gas companies have known for over 40 years that burning fossil fuels causes climate change. Leslie and I know that you know this. We know that you are aware of the hundreds of thousands of New Mexican citizens exposed to the polluted air and water caused by this drilling. We are also pretty sure you know about the sixth great extinction taking place right now. 1 million species of plants, animals, birds, fish, all living things are expected to go extinct in the next few years. 1 million species. That's mind-boggling. We know oil and gas drilling is not going away tomorrow. It will be with us for years to come. But you, members of the Environmental Improvement Board, have the opportunity and responsibility to actually improve, approve, and strengthen the ozone precursor rule to help curb the horrible wasting, polluting, leaking of methane and other volatile organic compounds, which the American Lung Association calls sunburn to the lungs. So please, please use your position to actually help improve the environment in New Mexico. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Leslie and I have our fingers crossed as we enjoy nature in our tiny yard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patterson. Our next public commenter would be Patricia Sheeley. Let me look for Miss Sheeley here. Or it might be Sheeley, excuse me. Ms. Sheeley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, I can hear your voice. Would you spell your name, please?
Patricia Sheeley.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Ms. Orth and members of the Environmental Improvement Board, my name is Patricia Sheeley. I am a member of the United Methodist Church Faith Community. I live in Gallup. My two main concerns about methane pollution are the health effects and its contribution to climate change. I support strong methane rules, and I want to thank you for holding these meetings and allowing me to speak. As a retired dietitian who worked with our Navajo brothers and sisters, I am very concerned about the effect of pollution on the health and development of our infants and children. We are only now becoming aware of the significance the environment and its accompanying stress plays on the developing fetus and the mother's ability to have a successful pregnancy. Pollutants such as methane and VOCs have an adverse effect on our older residents with heart and respiratory conditions as well. I grew up with one oil well on a 125-acre farm in Ohio. I can't imagine living in the midst of a whole field of wells. I worry about the health of our residents. I feel that we have a responsibility to care for the well-being of everyone. I find it embarrassing that New Mexico has a methane cloud over the Four Corners area that can be seen from space. The climate crisis is here. It is affecting our state with hotter temperatures, decreasing our snowpack and monsoons, and causing the loss of our pinyon pines and juniper forest. Our landscape is our greatest resource for the future. New Mexico can do our part by requiring frequent inspections of wells to find and fix leaks. Leaks due to equipment malfunction and lack of maintenance account for 70% of our emissions. We have the technology to do this. This could even be a source of increased jobs. The methane captured is a valuable resource that should not be wasted. Please take action today to strengthen these rules. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sheeley. Let's see, our next speaker would be David Anderson. I don't see Mr. Anderson on the call. After that, we have Lynn Hinton, who reached out through the chat. Let me look for Ms. Hinton. Ms. Hinton, I have unmuted you. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much.
All right, if you'd spell your name, please.
First name Lynne, last name Hinton, Hinton.
Thank you very much. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you, board members and Mrs. Orth, for allowing me to speak. I am Reverend Lynn Hinton, and I am the conference director of the New Mexico Conference of Churches, and I live in Albuquerque. I am here today because, like so many other people of faith, I am concerned about methane pollution in our state. I also come because of the scripture reading known as our lectionary on record for this Sunday. In the gospel reading, Jesus told his followers it would be better for a millstone to be hung around the neck of someone and thrown into the sea than to carry out harm against a child. Today I come speaking for our children, recognizing that I am part of a generation causing them harm, and remembering that we did not inherit this planet from our ancestors, but rather we are borrowing it from our children. We know that New Mexico does not have a great record regarding methane pollution. There are leaks from oil and gas operators that are releasing tons of methane. And we also know that the operators are not being held accountable for the pollution being created. I come asking that you now also speak for the children and create and enforce strong methane rules, that we find ways to protect our children by requiring more frequent inspections to find and repair leaks, that we develop strong requirements for operators to control their pollution, and that we find ways to cut all methane pollution from the oil and gas industries in our state. When the history books bear our stories, note our positions and our values, I hope this board and the people of faith across the state of New Mexico will be found to be on the side of taking care of our earth and our children. Thank you for allowing me to speak and for your concerns for our beautiful planet for present days and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Hinton. I have a few more folks reaching out through chat. Ruth Steagle, excuse me if I mispronounce your name. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, very clearly. Thank you. If you would please spell your name.
Striegel.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start your 5 minutes now.
My name is Ruth Steagle. I live in Albuquerque, where I'm a member of First Congregational United Church of Christ, and I serve as a board member of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light. I appreciate this opportunity to comment on methane regulations. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit oil fields around Carlsbad. I met many citizens there who were suffering from asthma, bronchial conditions, rashes, and odd cancers that the citizens felt could be related to methane and associated gases that they were breathing daily. I was able to see gas escaping from several oil facilities through a FLIR camera, which makes gas emissions visible. I'm asking you to require frequent inspections to find and fix leaks to protect the people living near oil and gas facilities. I'm asking the board to create strong requirements for operators to control escaping gases during the completion of a well or redevelopment of an existing well. I'm asking your support of strong methane rules to protect human health and God's creation. People living in oil and gas producing regions should not be made to suffer simply because they live near these wells. More often than not, the people impacted are children, the elderly, our Native communities, and those living in rural communities. I'm asking you to enact strong methane regulations to help address health, environmental justice, and climate justice concerns that affect people's lives and our future. Almost half the Native American residents of San Juan County live within a half mile of a well site. A half mile. Think of what it would mean to them to get up in the morning and breathe clean air. Colorado and other states have enacted regulations curbing methane waste while still allowing for growth in the industry. Methane regulation actually creates jobs in mitigation and manufacturing. Cleaning up our air will result in healthier children, adults, and elders, making our communities stronger and more resilient. The idea that strong regulation will reduce our tax income and take away jobs simply isn't true. That short-sighted narrative serves only to increase our societal imbalance and make our planet and our communities sicker and less able to cope in a rapidly changing world. In my faith tradition, we are asked to repent when we're not living in a life-giving way. The word repent means to turn around, change course, and go in a new and better direction. In this time of climate crisis, we are all faced with a moral reckoning, but also the opportunity to head in a new direction, one that seeks to protect without fail the health and well-being of our communities. Please help New Mexico find that new direction by enacting strong methane regulations that protect us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Steagle. Jack Edwards would like to offer comment. Let me look for you in the list here, Mr. Edwards. Here you are. I'm unmuting you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You're just a little quiet. If
All right.
that's
Is that any
better.
Okay.
Yeah, just make sure to keep your voice up. And would you raise your right hand? Do you swear
Okay.
or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you very much. Just this morning, I was reading something, and it said that Lake Powell and Lake Mead are currently at 1/3 their capacity levels, and that within a year, it's expected that Lake Powell, Glen Canyon Dam, will no longer be able to make hydropower. Earlier this summer, I saw articles that irrigators on the Sacramento River have for the first time been told to stop diverting water, that the water supply was too low. We have a pall of smoke hanging over the west. I recently drove from Washington back to New Mexico after visiting my children, and I just had to drive through horrendous smoke. It did get less as I crossed the mountains in Salt Lake City. I'm here to encourage the board to enact stronger rules to prevent fugitive methane releases. The purpose of this is to prevent increasingly large buildup of greenhouse gases and the worsening of global climate change. I think anybody who can connect a couple of dots can understand that. In the latest August 2021 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC identifies methane as one of the worst greenhouse gases and contributes to climate change. One of the profound issues associated with this is what is called methane acceleration. And this means that as the climate warms, new sources of sequestered methane are activated, and this includes releases from thawing permafrost and marine hydrates as the oceans warm. So the gas that we release now is not a linear effect, it's an accelerating effect. It's like if you put a microphone up to a speaker and you get this loud squealing feedback effect. That's what happens in global warming. We're seeing that now. If methane is such a global warming potential, why not control the releases? It's very a financial issue. And I think our health issues and other issues require us to take these efforts at this time to control these things. And I will leave you with just one more closing thought. Throughout the Southwest, one of the most frequently found ancestral Puebloan structures are their granaries, built of tightly mortared stone and mud, and built in high and inaccessible cliffs. What did they know that we seem to be forgetting? They knew it is vital to protect their seeds for the future. Wouldn't it be nice if we New Mexicans, with our rich cultural backgrounds and our special climate vulnerability, could be a leader in controlling fugitive methane emissions? Everyone needs to make the contributions that they can, and I do encourage the board to make strong regulations for the curbing of methane emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I have no one else reaching out through chat or email to offer public comment. Please know there are lots more opportunities at 9, 1, and 5 each day. So we will return to the technical case. I want to make sure that Mr. Boutier, who has been struggling to get back onto the platform, is with us. Mr. Boutier?
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Christina Sheehan. Has the echo resolved?
Yes, it has. Thank you.
Excellent.
Your voice is coming through clearly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for your patience.
All right. So let's see. Ms. Katz. There you are. Hi. So do I remember correctly that we're going to be moving to topic 21 at this point with witnesses Keene, Palmer, Smitherman, Nichols on direct, and then Keene, Palmer, Baca, Smitherman, Meyer, McNally, Blewett, and Kim on rebuttal.
I believe that's correct, and yes, I believe that's correct.
Right.
We might have to see as we get to those later ones, but.
Okay, so we're starting with Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer.
Yes, the department calls Elizabeth Bisbee Keene and Brian Palmer.
Okay, are they still among the panelists? I see Ms. Keene.
They're both here. I see Mr. Palmer.
Okay, there he is. Okay, thank you.
And I'll just say for the board that this testimony appears in NMED Exhibit 32 on pages 13 through 23, and NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 1 on pages 4 through 21. Okay. Ms. Keene, you previously testified regarding your qualifications, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Palmer, you did as well?
Yes, I did.
And Ms. Keene, the testimony you're summarizing on this topic appears in NMED Exhibit 32, which you already adopted on the record, correct?
Yes.
And an NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 1 as well, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Palmer, the same applies for you, that your testimony is on this topic is in NMED Exhibit 32 and NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 1 that you've already adopted.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Keene, do you want to start presenting on the definitions section of the rule at 20.2.50.7?
Yes, thank you. I just need permission to share.
Okay. Can you please give us a general overview of this section?
Sure. The section 20.2.50.7 includes definitions of terms used throughout Part 50. The proposed definitions were derived from state and federal regulations and other technical glossaries. The department received numerous comments on those definitions, and in response to those comments, the department made many necessary revisions, deleted unnecessary definitions, and added new definitions.
Thank you. And can you please summarize the definitions and revisions that were uncontested, which is the topic that we are covering at the moment?
Yes. So I will start. I won't go through in detail each one of these definitions unless the board would like me to do so. They're all self-explanatory. Instead, I'll go through each one of these definitions and discuss the changes that we've made. So the first change was to the definition of auto-igniter. NMOGA proposed to strike the language in the combustion chamber from that definition, and NMED agreed with that revision. It was warranted because open flares do not have and are not required to have a combustion chamber. We made another edit, a small edit within the definition of centrifugal compressor as well. And that concludes this set of definitions. In terms of, for the definition of custody transfer, NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal and others to delete this definition. I should also add that many of the industry parties agreed with NMOGA's requests. So where I'm referring to NMOGA, it was with other parties' agreement with NMOGA's requested changes. IPA&M requested the addition of the definition of design value, which we agreed with. We thought that provided, that was a necessary definition to include in Part 50. In terms of the definition of downtime, NMOGA proposed to delete not in operation or when a well is producing, and add solely for the purpose of destruction. I'm sorry, let me start that again. I'm looking at downtime. So for the definition of downtime, NMOGA proposed to add the word inoperable and delete not in operation, or when a well is producing and the control device is not in operation. And these revisions simplify the definition, and we agreed with that revision.
And Ms. Keene, that some of that is not shown in this red line on the slide. Is that correct?
Inoperable. You're right. That language inoperable was accepted and does not appear in this red line strikeout version of the rule.
Thank you.
For enclosed combustion device, NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal to delete the term gaseous fuel and replace with waste gas. Add solely for the purpose of destruction. Add or combustor and delete reboiler and heater. And the department agreed with those clarifications of the term as those align with the language with the department's regulatory intent. For hydrocarbon liquid, NMOGA proposed to delete hydrocarbon liquid does not include produced water, which the department agrees with. And the revisions to this definition clarify the department's intent with respect to this term.
And Ms. Keene, I'm going to clarify, you said delete that sentence, they proposed to add it.
Correct, they proposed to add that. I need to make an edit to that. With respect to the term liquid transfer, NMOGA proposed to delete the term loading and or produced water from and make other minor editorial changes, and NMED agreed with those changes. With respect to the definition of permanent pit, NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal to add or pond to the term and or pond within the definition. Those revisions clarify the meaning of the term and the department's intent with respect to the sources subject to this part. NMOGA requested to make changes to the definition of potential to emit, which the department agreed with. They requested to strike the term contaminant and replace with pollutant, which is aligns with our definition in our state and federal rule, and strike the and replace with any, make other minor editorial changes that the department agreed with. Also for pneumatic diaphragm pump, NMOGA proposed to delete natural from the definition. The revision was appropriate because those pumps may use a variety of gases to actuate. And this revision clarifies the department's regulatory intent with respect to this equipment under Part 50. For the definition of produced water, NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal to delete fluid and replace with liquid and add associated equipment. I'm sorry. NMED, let me take a step back here. For the definition of produced water, NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal to delete fluid and replace with liquid, and to delete drilling for or and replace with well completion. And these revisions clarify the definition and the department's intent with respect to this term. For produced water management unit, NMED agreed with the addition of the words or pond to align with the previous definition of permanent pit. NMED did not agree with NMOGA's proposal to add and associated equipment at the location used for the recycling of produced water. NMED intended to include recycling facilities within this term and is used in this part. Responsible official was the next definition that was modified, and NMED agreed with NMOGA's proposal to revise this definition to clarify that an official does not need to be responsible for the overall operation of the source in order to be considered a responsible official, as that term is used within Part 50. that was the last edit. I do want to add that Nemoga requested a new definition of tank battery. That definition was not included in the September 16th version of the rule. However, the department does not take issue with that definition and would be agreeable to including it in Part 50.
Okay. I believe that's the end of the definition section.
Yes.
No more questions on this topic.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if Mr. Palmer was going to be addressing it as well. Let me pause for a moment. In the event other council or party representatives have questions, please join us on screen. I see no one. In that case, I will turn to the board for their questions. In the event you are an attendee and would pose a question to Ms. Keene, please reach out in the chat. Madam Chair, may not be with us. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I have no questions, Madam Hearing Officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions here.
Thank you. Member Bitzer.
Just happy to see regulators and the regulated working together. No questions.
Thank you. Oh, Madam Chair reached out through chat to say that she has no questions. I know her video is giving her trouble. Member Duval.
No questions. Thanks for the testimony.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
One quick clarifying question. So the changes that are made after the September 16th version, I guess we'll get in post-hearing submittals. At some point, we'll get a final version with these other changes.
Yes, sorry. I think that's more my purview, but yes, Member Garcia, that's it. We'll submit a final red line version after the hearing.
Very much.
Thank you. Member Hunker, any questions?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you very much. Will we hear now from Mr. Palmer?
Oh, sorry. I think Mr. Palmer was mistakenly included in this.
Oh.
Now that I realize that, so I apologize for that. I think we would be moving on to Mr. Smitherman.
Mr. Smitherman, all right, great. Let's see, do we have Mr. Smitherman with us? Do I need to? There he is.
I do have some slides, Madam Hearing Officer.
All righty. Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Smitherman, did you previously provide and adopt some direct testimony on definitions in this matter?
I did. Give me just one moment, please.
Okay.
Okay, I'm ready. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Smitherman, were your comments mostly found in Nemoga Exhibit A1?
I believe so, yes.
And 41 for your rebuttal?
I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And you have no changes on the definitional testimony from what's previously been presented and adopted, correct?
I do not.
Okay. Would you like to give a real quick summary of our thoughts on the uncontested definitions Ms. Keene just walked through?
Certainly. I think I'm on the correct section. NMOGA did make a few small clarifying edits on some of the definitions, and not anything particularly controversial. And I won't be reviewing all of those today, but if the board has any questions or others have any questions about those, I'll certainly welcome those questions. One of the things that we tried very, very hard to do was to try to define things, especially facilities, so that there were no gaps, no overlaps, and as few as ambiguities as we could come up with. The clarity that comes from that, it benefits everyone. It's better for the NMED, it's better for the regulated community, and it's certainly better for the public too. So as we walk through some of these suggested changes, keep that in mind, because that's really what our goal was on these facility definitions. The first definition that I'd like to address is a definition that NMOGA suggested be added, and that is a definition for the phrase tank battery, for the term tank battery. The term tank battery is used throughout this rule. It is in applicability paragraphs. It is in the titles of tables. It is in the text itself. And without a definition for that, it becomes very unclear as to where some of these rules apply and where they don't. And we really, really would prefer, and I think everyone would prefer, that there be clarity in these rules. I'm going to walk you through a diagram that we created that attempts to define or describe every possible type of facility that's out there in the oil field. And I'm going to start on this left side in this kind of gray box area, talking about the upstream, the well sites, as NMED calls them. We had suggested calling those well production facilities, but as you'll see later, we think that the well site terminology is just fine. There are several types, if you will, of well sites. And each one of these little oblong, I'll call them circles, oblongs, represents a type of well site. This particular well site type has these little X's on it, as you see down at the bottom. X's are wells. And so there's wells on this site. These little 3 rectangles represents tanks that are on that site. That's the tank battery that's on that site. So here, pretty traditional oil field installation where you've got wells, and on the same site you've got the tanks themselves that support those wells. You'll typically have other facilities on there too, separators and perhaps heater treaters and other things. But I'm focused mostly on where the wells are and where the tanks are. You'll also have facilities, this is very traditional also, where you've got a site that has wells on it and tanks on it, but you also have wells that are off that site. They may have individual well sites of their own with no tanks, and they send their production through flow lines to this facility. But you'll also find some cases where you've got a facility that has a tank set of tanks on it, a tank battery, if you will, with no wells on it. And your wells are all remote from that particular site. There are other configurations of these, but generally speaking, these are all very similar in their kind of function. They're the original wells where they're the wells where the fluids originate, oil, gas, and water. And there are facility sites, some of which that have tanks on them, and quite frankly, some could not have tanks on them. But I'm focused on the tank batteries. Once you leave these well sites or well production facilities, if you wish, You will typically send the water to a certain type of facility. You'll send the oil or condensate to a perhaps different type of facility, and you'll send the gas to a different type of facility. So let's talk about the water. The two types of water facilities are an SWD, a saltwater disposal facility, where that water is stored temporarily and then pumped into a disposal well. You'll find tanks on that type of facility, a tank battery, if you will. You'll also perhaps find tanks, a tank battery, at a recycling facility, and as this rule calls it, a produced water management unit. This could be owned by the same owner as the upstream production, or it could be a third party, typically a commercial SW or commercial water service provider. But again, you could have tanks on that facility as well, or a tank battery in my term. Crude oil can be trucked straight to the pipeline transmission system. It can be pipelined straight to the pipeline transmission system, or it could be pipelined to a facility typically owned by the same owner as these facilities, called the central delivery point, where all of the crude oil from, say, several of these upstream well sites is collected, perhaps treated a bit, and then sent through a custody transfer point to the oil transmission system. Those facilities will certainly have tanks on them, and in my view, have tank batteries. Natural gas typically leaves these upstream facilities and at some point goes to a gas compression station. It also could be owned perhaps by the same owner and operator of these facilities, but it also could be owned by the midstream gas gathering company. They also will have tanks on them. As natural gas leaves that gas compression station, we call, by the way, both this facility here in the oil sector and this facility here in the gas sector are all clearly defined and incorporated in the definition of gathering and boosting. Once gas leaves that gathering and boosting station, goes to a natural gas processing plant, where again, you could have a string of tanks or tank battery, and then on to the transmission system, transmission compressor station, which also could have tanks. Part of my point here is that these tanks can live in many of these facilities. These tank batteries will live in many of these facilities. They're components of many of these facilities. So using the term tank battery without a clear definition of what it is can cause quite a bit of confusion. Let's take a quick look at the well site definition that's in this current rule as offered by NMED. It means the equipment directly associated with one or more oil wells or natural gas wells upstream of a natural gas processing plant. Here's the important part. A well site may include equipment used for extraction, collection, routing, storage, there's your tanks, separation, treating, dehydration, artificial lift, combustion, compression, pumping, metering, monitoring, and product piping. Now, for me, that sounds a whole lot like the old traditional description of a tank battery. It is what I've been familiar with for 40 years, but I will say in our group of experts that have been working on this rule for NMOGA and for the industry, we had quite a bit of disagreement within our group as to what a tank battery was. So without a definition, a lack of clarity arises, and it arises actually in this rule itself. I suggest that you take a look at section 20.2.50.114, which is the compressor seals section. The provisions of that rule are unclear. In fact, if you look at the very bottom here, I've got that rule, section of the rule quoted. Reciprocating compressors located at tank batteries, that's emphasis added by me, are subject to the requirement. Reciprocating compressors located at well sites are not subject to the requirement. Well, wait a second. I thought a well site had definition of that include the definition of all these things that could be happening on a well site, including storage, which is tanks. And so it becomes very unclear as to what sites are in fact applicable to this rule. The lack of clarity that this causes is really not necessary. We've got a way to fix this. If we understand that a tank battery really is, for this rule, is basically a string of tanks. It's a component of other facilities. And we can use those other facility names to clearly and completely define where these sections of this rule apply and where they don't. So I urge the board and NMED to adopt NMOGA's definitions of facilities and also it would have been, I think it would have been confusing actually. So what we're suggesting to you is that we do adopt the term tank battery, and as NMOGA has suggested, and that we let NMED look back at the rule and adjust the rule language so that this confusion, this lack of clarity is addressed. And NMOGA stands ready to help in that process because it helps us, it helps NMED, and it helps the public. Hydrocarbon liquids, we appreciate the fact that NMED has accepted our suggestion to make it clear that hydrocarbon liquids do not include produced water. If it did, some of these rules would be very difficult, if not infeasible, for that phase. And that is that's the sum total of my comments. Council.
Thank you, Mr. Smitherman. I don't have any additional comments for you, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smitherman and Mr. Heiser. Let me pause for a moment. In the event other council or party representatives would like to join us on screen for questions. Ms. Katz?
Mr. Smitherman, I just wanted to ask you if you heard that Ms. Keene's testimony that the department was agreeable to NMOGA's definition of tank battery.
No, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you, Ms. Katz. Anyone else? Let me pause for a moment. Oh, I will turn then to the board for their questions.
Ms. Orth?
Oh, yes?
Could I extend my answer with the question? Ms. Katz, does that mean that we can also go back through and I'll say clean up the places where the term tank battery exists, where it causes confusion?
Yes, I anticipate that would be a part of adopting that definition adjusting the rule appropriately. So we can work with NMOGA to do that.
Great. We're happy to help. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, so let me turn to the board members for their questions. While I'm doing that, in the event you are on the platform as an attendee and you would have a question of Mr. Smitherman, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair, I see you on screen again. Do you have questions?
At this point, I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Am I coming through better? I'm trying to work on my internet here.
Yes, actually you are.
Okay.
And I know you're there even if your video's off. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis, do you have questions of Mr. Smitherman?
I don't have any at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Cates?
No questions here.
Okay, Member Bitzer? Member Bitzer, do you have questions? I think you're muted. No, he's shaking his head no. Member Duval?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia? No, she's waving no. And Member Honker?
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The gremlins are after us again, I think. Do we go at this point, if I'm reading across the spreadsheet? Thank you, Mr. Smitherman.
Thank you, ma'am.
To Wild Earth Guardians and Witness Nichols. I see Mr. Nykiel on the screen, so I think I got that right. Mr. Nykiel?
Yes, thank you. And would you mind granting me presentation privileges? I may need that. Thank you. And Wild Earth Guardians would like to call our witness, Mr. Jeremy Nichols, if he could be added to the panelist list, please. Great. Would you?
I need
Mr.
to swear
Nichols?
Mr. Nichols, right?
I was just going to have him test his audio, but yeah, go ahead. That'll be a test.
All right. Mr. Nichols, I saw you raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Oh, your voice is very clear. Thank you.
Great, great.
And
Thank you, Madam
you
Hearing
should
Officer.
mention exhibits, Mr. Nykiel.
Yes, thank you. And to that point, it's my understanding there are no objections to Wild Earth Guardians exhibits. And for efficiency's sake, if that's still the case, we would move to admit Wild Earth Guardians exhibits 1 through 21.
All right, let me pause for a moment just to make sure there are no objections. Sounds like not. So thank you very much. Wild Earth Guardians exhibits 1 through 21, you said?
That's right.
Are admitted.
Thank you. And for the benefit of the board and the other parties, the primary exhibits I'll be referring to for purposes of our direct are Wild Earth Guardians exhibits 1, 2, and 3. Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Officer, members of Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Matt Nykiel, and I'm here with my co-counsel Daniel Timmons, and we represent Wild Earth Guardians. Good afternoon, Mr. Nichols. Would you please state your name for the record and spell it for the court reporter?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Nichols, spelled Jeremy-Nichols.
Great, thank you. Mr. Nichols, please share with whom you're employed and your job title.
Yeah, I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director for Wild Earth Guardians. Wild Earth Guardians is a nonprofit environmental advocacy group that's based in Santa Fe, but works on West-wide environmental conservation issues, including issues related to confronting the climate crisis and helping to advance a clean energy future.
Thanks. Would you tell us about your experience when it comes to air quality regulations?
My work has involved dealing with air quality regulatory matters for many years. There's quite an interplay between our climate issues that we're facing and air pollution issues that we're also trying to address, such as ground level ozone pollution. I've weighed in on numerous air quality regulatory proceedings on behalf of guardians over the years, including Environmental Protection Agency proceedings, including rulemakings, permitting processes, and also with a number of state proceedings, including rulemaking hearings, permitting, and the development of air quality policy, including in New Mexico, Colorado, and other Western states.
Okay, thank you. Would you describe some of the administrative bodies that you've submitted comments to and testified before?
Yes. Well, first off, the Environmental Improvement Board, which I've had the pleasure to testify before in past proceedings. Also, the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission, the board's sister regulatory body in Colorado. Also, the agencies themselves, the staff, the New Mexico Environment Department, the Colorado Air Pollution Control Division, and other similar state agencies as well. Interacting with them in terms of permitting matters, regulatory matters, enforcement matters, and the like. The Environmental Appeals Board, which is a U.S. Environmental Protection Agency board, I've practiced before them, and just have generally engaged in many formal proceedings regarding the development and implementation of air quality policy.
Okay, thank you. And is Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 2 an accurate copy of your resume?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Did you include any examples of comments that you filed with air quality boards in other states regarding similar ozone precursor controls for the oil and gas industry?
I did, just as an example, just to illustrate to the board the level of my engagement on behalf of guardians in air quality proceedings that are specific to addressing ozone precursor emissions from the oil and gas sector. So I submitted as an example, an illustrative example, a pre-hearing statement that was filed in the context of a rulemaking hearing before the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission in 2019, and addressing some similar issues that are at play in this proceeding.
Okay, and that example is marked as Wild Earth Guardians Exhibit 4, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and you submitted signed pre-filed testimony in this matter marked as Guardians Exhibit 3?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have any changes to make to that pre-filed testimony?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and do you adopt this pre-filed testimony as your testimony today?
I do.
Okay. So, Mr. Nichols, let's turn to ozone in New Mexico. Would you summarize the state of ozone in New Mexico from your perspective?
Yeah, just briefly. This has been obviously covered by other parties as well, but just flagging, our perspective on the situation. The ozone problem does seem to be persisting in the state of New Mexico, with numerous exceedances of the ozone ambient air quality standards recorded in 2021 as well as in recent years. Since we filed or at least my written testimony, I am aware that there have been additional exceedances recorded at monitors in the state of New Mexico. And it's very concerning to see that the problem, if it's not getting worse, then it doesn't seem to be getting better. So it is very concerning from a public health and an environmental health standpoint for the state of New Mexico.
Okay. And is New Mexico's high ozone unique, or have other states been experiencing similar conditions?
Ozone is becoming a challenge for many states in the Western U.S., outside of California at least, which has traditionally struggled with ozone for urbanization reasons. But what we have seen, and in my experience, what I have seen is that in the interior Rocky Mountain West, states are increasingly facing the challenge of high ozone as a result of unchecked oil and gas extraction activities and the precursor emissions that are released as a result of oil and gas production. It's not the sole source and it's not the sole reason, but it is kind of a common theme that we see in states like Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, where high ozone does seem to be very closely linked to the level of oil and gas extraction activity.
Okay. And the last question in sort of this line of questions, can you tell us generally about the relationship between ozone and climate change?
Well, it's come up a few times during the hearing so far. I mean, in the face of the climate crisis, ozone problems do seem to be worsening, and that trend seems to be the new norm, where in the face of rising temperatures, the conditions that create ozone are becoming more frequent, more extensive. Ozone seasons are lasting longer. There does seem to be this direct link, which is something to be mindful of, obviously, with the aim of confronting this problem, that reducing ozone efforts need to be focused on anticipating the conditions that the climate crisis are likely to bring that will likely induce higher ozone levels.
Okay. I'd like to turn to the department's proposal that's the subject of this hearing. In general, what is Wildlife Guardian's position on the department's proposed rule?
In general, we think it's a good step forward. It's refreshing. We've engaged in other states' regulatory proceedings where they have adopted similar rules to address ozone precursor emissions from the oil and gas sector. It's been mentioned throughout the hearing so far about Colorado's efforts. Colorado has taken a lot of steps forward, and it's refreshing to see New Mexico move in that direction as well. That said, we do see some areas where improvements could tighten up these rules more significantly, and I think provide a more complete level of protection for communities and people in New Mexico.
Okay. Fair to say, good step forward, but you don't think the proposed rules are the strongest rules in comparison to other states?
Well, we have suggested areas for revision to what's been proposed, and we do feel that in terms of what we have proposed, if this board agrees that these concepts make sense, it would definitely take them further. You know, New Mexico is a leader in so many ways just because of the statutory requirements that ozone levels that are within 95% of the NAAQS need to be acted upon and need to be addressed. Colorado doesn't have that law. Other states don't have that law. So New Mexico is already stepping up to lead in big ways. And we just see this rulemaking as another opportunity to follow up and follow through with that leadership. And so to that end, we have suggested some areas of improvement, very targeted areas of improvement in the proposed rules that we think, should this board adopt them, would definitely tighten them up and make them all the more effective.
Okay, thanks. And Guardian's recommended changes to the department's proposed rules are included as Wild Earth Guardian's Exhibit 1, which is titled Wild Earth Guardian's Proposed Redline Modifications to NMAD's Proposed 20.2.50 NMAC.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And just briefly, for the benefit of the board, would you just explain how Guardians presented that red line modification in Exhibit 1?
Well, these were very concise red lines, and rather than present the whole draft of the proposed rule and our very surgically targeted red lines, we presented them as excerpts for the board to more easily understand what we were proposing and more clearly see our red lines.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to Guardian's first proposal in the definitions section. Would you briefly summarize that proposal, please?
Yeah, so what we have offered is, kind of going off the last witness, is some clarity that we think would help improve the implementation and effectiveness of the proposed regulations. And what we have suggested is that the potential to emit definition in the regulations at 20.2.50.7 paragraph GG, that there be a clarifying sentence added at the end that clarifies that emissions associated with the stationary source that may occur prior to commencement of operation or commencement of production, that those emissions need to be accounted for and addressed when assessing a source's potential to emit. This clarity was offered based on evidence that we've come across that indicates that perhaps emissions, stationary source emissions that occur at the drilling stage may not be properly accounted for in assessing a full stationary source facility's potential to emit, which of course has ramifications for the applicability of the rules.
And what would the consequences be of overlooking or omitting potential emissions? What could those be?
Well, if a proper assessment of a facility's potential to emit is not undertaken, then it could lead the department and sources to conclude that they're not subject to certain control requirements, which, if that's not actually the case, then that's obviously not a desired outcome. We want to make sure there's an understanding of potential to emit such that sources really clearly understand whether or not they are subject to the proposed rules, and for the department and also for the public as well.
Thank you. And would you just briefly describe, you mentioned that there's indication that these emissions are not being accounted for. Would you just describe how you know that?
Yeah, so we collaborated with a group of students at UCLA that were a part of the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability to try to better understand kind of the sequencing of the development of oil and gas wells and the air permitting process. Because as we have noticed over the years, and I think it's been acknowledged by the department at times, there's kind of a disconnect between the regulatory authority exercised by the department and then the authority exercised by the Oil Conservation Division. And it seems like that disconnect has led to situations where stationary sources of air pollution, where sources or operators may commence construction of those stationary sources, excuse me, before obtaining the proper permit coverage from the Environment Department, such as a general permit or a notice of intent. And this is specific to the development of wells at a wellhead site. And the experience that we, in working with the UCLA students, what we uncovered is that companies will begin drilling wells at a well site, and in the process, emissions will be released, from the wellbore. And for all intents and purposes, I mean, those are point source emissions that are subject to regulation under state and federal clean air laws. But then the permitting activity focuses on the construction of associated tank batteries or other associated processing equipment. But that activity is all part of the construction of that single stationary source. And so it does seem like, and we're not, this wasn't some conclusive, our report found signs that companies are beginning the drilling of wells before getting their permits. How extensive of a compliance problem is it? We don't fully know, but we have seen enough, and in our Exhibit 21, or my Exhibit 21 to my testimony, we think it warrants contemplating adding clarity in the definition of potential to emit to ensure that stationary sources of air pollution receive their permits before they begin construction.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to add before offer you for cross-examination?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Madam Hearing Officer, I have no further questions at this point and would offer Mr. Nichols for cross-examination.
Thank you. I see Ms. Katz on screen. Ms. Katz, do you have questions of Mr. Nichols?
Just one quick question, Madam Hearing Officer. Hello, Mr. Nichols. I'm Laura Katz, the attorney for NMED. I just wanted to ask you if the approach that you're talking about with respect to your changes for the PTE definition, is that something that other states have adopted, like Colorado? Have they adopted that approach?
I don't believe they have to the same extent that we've offered here. And, you know, I guess I would also offer that the same opportunity to suggest this kind of clarifying language, I don't believe has arisen. And so this this proceeding and this proposed set of regulations seemed like an ideal opportunity to raise this and to make this suggestion.
Okay, thanks. I thought I had heard you say that you had submitted comments and participated in Colorado rulemaking, so that's why I asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let me pause for a moment in the event other parties' counsel or representatives have questions. Oh, I think I see Mr. Heiser.
Hi, Madam Hearing Officer. My name is Brandon Curtis, appearing on behalf of NMOGA. I had just a few questions for Mr. Nichols.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nichols. Appreciated your testimony today. My name is Brandon Curtis. I had just a few questions regarding your testimony. You referred to the report in Exhibit 21 in concert with Wild Earth Guardians and UCLA Institute of the Environmental and Sustainability group put together, and I just wanted to flesh out some of the issues that you raise in that report. So you rely on the report for the conclusion that 35% or more of assessed wellhead facilities may have been constructed prior to being permitted by NMEDs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do the findings of this report form, at least in part, the basis for your opinion that a revision to the definition of PTE is required?
It raises concerns that some added clarity could be beneficial for both sources and the department and the public as well.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to turn to a specific page in the study here. I believe it's on page 15. And maybe you know this factoid off the top of your head. I believe on page 15 it states that only 62 wells were ultimately included in the assessment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar with Brandon Powell's testimony from the OCD that was presented yesterday, in which he testified that there are currently 34,616 oil wells and 29,002 natural gas wells permitted in the state currently?
Yes, I believe I heard that.
So would you agree that the study in Exhibit 21 covered a very small sample of permitted wells in New Mexico?
Well, I don't know if I can comment to that effect. I mean, I will say that they took a sampling and, you know, in working with the students at UCLA, I know they were challenged by virtue of that disconnect between OCD's regulation and NMED's, and NMED not necessarily tracking the well development side of things, even if there are air emissions associated with it, and not having that data really connected or crosswalked at all. And so they were challenged in terms of trying to make correlations. And I think they did the best they could. Would we have liked to see them look at additional well facilities? Absolutely. But I think the look that they took raised enough concern for us, again, that added clarity could be useful.
Thank you. I wanted to point out one assertion in the report and see if you agree with this characterization. On page 17 of the report, the authors state that the report is limited to, quote, an extremely small subset of facilities. Do you agree with that characterization from the report?
I agree. The report says what it says.
Okay, great. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Let me pause for a moment in the event other council. Oh, I see Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose, do you have questions for Mr. Nichols?
Excuse me, Madam Hearing Officer, I do. Mr. Nichols, I'm trying to understand exactly what your language is that you're proposing here to the definition of PTE is intended to include. I see that it includes non-mobile source emissions. What kind of emissions are you referring to at production sites that you think are not now captured that would be captured by this definition?
Well, and thank you for that question, Mr. Rose. And you raise a really important issue in that, I guess from a technical standpoint, the definition of PTE should account for emissions that are subject to regulation at the well development stage. And I think this was flagged by the department in some of the rebuttal testimony that the definition of PTE already is sufficient. And we just feel like some clarity could help, I guess, help foster better understanding of the true scope of that definition. We included the phrase non-mobile source because, as many of us know, mobile sources such as a drilling rig engine are not subject to regulation under a stationary source permitting program or subject to regulation by the department. Those are subject to federal regulation. And so we wanted to just make clear that the scope of the emissions that we're clarifying need to be addressed are not those mobile source emissions. So, and perhaps there could be some added clarity to refer specifically to point source emissions and not fugitive emissions. And that's something I'll grant you. We could have added that clarity.
And I guess what I'm getting at more is that in terms of the application of this definition, since it only applies to Part 50, I was curious whether you thought that approach would then transfer to the NSR permit program under Part 72, whether similar clarification in your mind was necessary, or what you thought or what you were trying to accomplish in terms of adding this as it applied to both the regulatory program and the pre-construction permit review program.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I appreciate that. Obviously, the scope of what was before us was a set of regulations specific to the oil and gas sector, and we presented this proposal because we saw this opportunity to provide clarification specific to this sector where it does seem like clarification is needed. Obviously, we weren't going to propose changes to the construction permitting rules, as that would have been outside the scope of this rulemaking. But we figured this was a good place to start. And to the extent that clarity needs to be added to other, to the extent that potential to emit is defined in other sections of the NMAC, I won't say right now whether the clarification is needed, but perhaps if this clarification is added here, it's worth considering down the road.
And let me just ask this. You're aware, are you not, that under Part 72, for facilities that require an NSR permit, they can't begin construction until they actually have a permit from the department, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And is your concern that that's not being administered appropriately by the department at well sites, and that there's somehow some constructions occurring prior to the permit at these sites?
Yeah, there's concern that it may be happening, and that's why we've offered clarity to make sure that to the extent it is happening, that it perhaps gets addressed.
And do you have any sense of how many well sites have a PTE, or in the case of Part 72, I think the terminology is potential emission rate, how many of those actually exceed 25 tons per year of criteria pollutants to be subject to an NSR permit?
No, I don't know those numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Let me ask, I have a question from a board member about Wild Earth Guardians exhibits on the list of documents available. Mr. Nykiel?
Yes, thank you for that question. Our exhibit list was included in our notice of intent to present technical testimony, and the exhibit list begins at page 7 of that document. I apologize, we did not include a separate standalone exhibit list, but that's where you can find it. I can also share that if that's helpful.
All right, thank you.
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Phoebe.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to follow up with Pam because I can't find the exhibits either. I've been looking throughout his whole testimony trying to find them. So we're just making sure that they were available to the board.
Yeah. Mr. Nykiel, you said page 7, the exhibits, not just the exhibit list, but the actual exhibits start at page 7 of the NOI.
Oh, I'm sorry. The exhibit list begins at page 7, and then we filed our exhibits individually with Pam. So they, to my knowledge, they were available to the other parties and posted on the EIB webpage.
Okay, we're just trying to find them.
Madam Hearing Officer, I just got off the phone with Pam, so she's gonna repost them up on the Docket Matters website. I know while Mr. Nichols, I apologize, we're all trying to scramble and reference the exhibits, and so I apologize, Hearing Officer. I don't know if you want to take a moment break while Pam gets that up.
You know, I think that's an excellent idea. We would need a break by 3 in any event. So let's reconvene around 2:45. And Mr. Nichols, if you would hang in there with us until we're sure the board members can see those. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
2:45.